Hello and welcome. It is Canvas the Niger-Delta Roundtable, and once again we're here to discuss the future and the progressive development of this very rich region indeed. Every week we take time to reflect on matters relevant to the growth and development of the Niger-Delta region and her people. Today I focus once again on how to take this region to a more promising future. And be reminded, the program is sponsored by the operator of the NNPC, SPDC, Total Energies Archive Joint Venture, the Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria Limited, headquartered in Port Harcourt. I'm Adedayo Elushakin. Our topic today, the value and virtue of public service. Now, the United Nations Public Service Day is celebrated on June 23 each year. It aims to celebrate the value and virtue of public service to the community. This day recognizes that democracy and successful governance are built on the foundation of a competent civil service. It highlights the contributions of public service in the development process, recognize the work of public servants, and encourage young people to pursue careers in the public sector. A public service is the backbone of any thriving society. It's the selfless dedication of individuals who devote their time, energy, and skills to serve the public, often putting the needs of others before their own. From teachers shaping our future generations, the healthcare workers saving lives, to civil servants ensuring the smooth running of our cities, public service is all around us. But what drives these individuals? What virtues do they uphold? And how does their work add value to our lives and our communities? Now, these are the questions we're exploring today on Canvas and Air. Again, the topic, the value and virtue of public service. And my guest for this conversation is Carrie B. George Esquire. Carrie B. George, hello and welcome to Canvas and Air.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the program.
My guest, Carrie B. George, is a teacher, a lawyer, a mediator, and communications advisor and trainer. He retired from the River State Civil Service in 2023 as Director, Administration and Supplies Public Relations in the River State Universal Basic Education Board. Carrie B. George, welcome again.
Thank you.
Now we delve right to it then. I do have some questions for you. It's great to have you on the show, by the way. I've had the privilege of having conversations with you at different times on different shows on radio and the like, and it's always illuminating talking with you.
I'm flattered.
So before we get to the crux of the matter for discussion, when I was reading out a profile a while ago, a very brief version of it, of course, you're recently retired last year. What's that like? What's retirement like?
Well, retirement is an interesting and pleasant experience. It gives you freedom in some ways. You don't have to wake up in the morning and rush to get to the office at 7:30 and then maybe work till 5 o'clock each day. So it gives you time to think about a couple of things better. And then it also somewhat frees you to respond to some of the things that friends, acquaintances, and professional colleagues might want you to do for them. So it's a new life, particularly as in my case, if you retire in sound health.
Now, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself because this was going to come up at some point in the conversation, but I'm sure we'll get there as well. You mentioned that one of the things that it affords you is not having to wake up so early and get to the office at 7:30 a.m. Do public servants in the Niger-Delta or Nigeria at large, do they still do that? Do they get to the office 7:30? Because you get to a ministry or department of government even 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and it's not unusual to hear expressions such as "he's not on seat" or "she's not on seat."
A typical Nigerian expression, not on seat. Again, it depends on the manner of service rendered by that office and the discipline of the individual supervising that office. So you find that, yes, some people have this impression that civil servants resume at midday and close by 2 p.m., maybe, putting in just 2 hours of work each day. But it's not exactly like that, particularly when you render the kind of service that the needs of people, or the needs of the persons you're serving, is so paramount that you really can't afford not to be around. And that's why a good number of civil servants, you may be surprised to learn, actually go to work at weekends and public holidays to ensure that the welfare of the persons, the individuals they need to attend to, will be properly taken care of in those folders called files.
We'll get to those in a moment, why they have to do that. Once again, you recently retired you are. How long were you in the public service for?
27 years.
Oh, that's a long time, isn't it?
Yeah. And I statutorily retired on grounds of age. I turned 60 years of age. Some people are surprised that I'm 60 and looking the way I do, but I had the benefit of having a government registered birth certificate from my parents, so I didn't have to guess my age and swear to all kinds of documents that didn't quite reflect who I was. So I had a birth certificate. I didn't have cause to make any adjustments, but I thank God especially for sound health, physical and mental, and that's indeed what still gives me my unique selling proposition. Professional colleagues and others, calling me, inviting me to be part of things they are doing, and in the course of those interactions, of course, the bottom line, something drops into my pocket, and I smile.
That's always a good thing. So you retired, statutorily age 60.
Yes.
Is congratulations in order?
Definitely. Thank you.
Congratulations, and I wish you the very best in or with the next chapter of your life.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's get to the crux of today's conversation then. Starting with what I suppose may be the most obvious question I'll ask you: what is the public service?
The public service, a typical dictionary would give you more than one entry about public service. One of the entries, of course, would be a government office, government department. Another would probably say someone, or government employment. And that's the sense, of civil service, civil servant, government office. But holistically, public service refers to a service performed or provided by the government in the interest of the people, not necessarily to make profit, but sometimes, at a fee or cost to the members of the public. And that would include, you've already mentioned it, teachers, people in the education sector, health services providers, waste disposal and management. These are services that are provided by the government for the public, and in most cases either free or at a small cost. So the people who perform, the individuals, the human beings, the personnel through whom the government drives these provisions are the ones we call civil servants or public servants in some cases. Now, the distinction or difference between civil servant and public servant is a very thin one, but often applied mainly in terms of the manner of their employment. The civil servant is typically, someone whose employment has a statutory flavor. It is tenured. He retires at the age of 60 or whatever is stipulated, or after 35 years of service, whichever comes first. And then the public servant, on the other hand, is someone who is appointed, usually a political appointee, for a short fixed term, and then he, plays his own part at the end of the 3, 4, 5 years or whatever is specified in the law guiding his employment. He exits the stage. So the civil servant is the one who has that statutory, whose employment has a statutory flavor that runs for 35 years or 60 years or 70 years of age, as the case may be.
Well, but like you said, it's a thin line, and sometimes I think both expressions or terms are often used interchangeably somewhat, I suppose.
In fact, as an individual, I often preferred, particularly to non-Nigerians, I prefer to describe myself as a public servant rather than as a civil servant.
That's fine then. So we'll stay.
Even though I was a civil servant, really.
Well, the United Nations calls it a public service
Yes.
day, so we'll just stick with that.
Yeah.
How does it differ from other forms of work? You describe service rendering, more or less. But of course, besides those services, we have several other services being rendered that make our lives worth to live in and easier to deal with on a daily basis. How does the public service differ from other kinds of service?
Well, the first most distinguishing feature of the public service is that it is highly organized, structured into systems, processes, responsibilities, how to delegate matters. So the public service is a bureaucracy. And because it is a bureaucracy, sometimes the services that are rendered and the manner they are rendered goes through a ponderous, you might say even slow process before it is done. For example, if as an individual you wish to establish a school, you make an application to the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education, maybe the commissioner or whoever is in charge, minutes it to the director in charge of inspecting facilities of individuals applying for establishment of school. And then they take their time, arrange a suitable day to have all the requisite personnel that would come do the inspection, check out your curriculum, check out the caliber of personnel you have to run the school. And then they go back, they do a report. The report is considered, and then the management that's responsible for considering and taking decisions on such reports eventually meet, and then the decision is taken. Now, what I've said in just a couple of seconds could take months or even a year, as the case may be. So there's a certain, perhaps, so there's a certain bureaucratic experience that you would find having to deal with the public service. But that's because matters are really standardized, and it's not proper or fair to deviate from the standard. So typically, the public service is characterized by bureaucracy. It is characterized by a process of doing things. You could even say it is often inflexible. And then in the case of Nigeria, even when social and other circumstances warrant a change in the manner of doing these things, the process of getting that change would also be difficult, because we have organizations or sub-organizations like the Council on Establishment, which is both national at the federation and then also at the state level. So even if a state finds it convenient to make a change in the operations, it might still require that state making a proposal to the National Council on Establishments, which will now also meet, and they don't meet every day, which will meet, consider the proposal.
So it seems to me that the one difference between the public service and other forms of service is the bureaucracy, the red tape,
Essentially.
And how long it takes to get anything
Essentially,
done.
because if with the private establishments, where perhaps there is even a unitary command structure, someone establishes a company, he's essentially in control, even if the law requires that there should be more than one director registered in favor of a company. But we know that the power resides in one particular individual, and who could just simply get the board together and impose his will on the board.
But even then, I mean, we have other scenarios where a person can't impose, but we still have things done a lot faster. And that takes me to my next thought, really. How does the public service improve a society? And then I want to go back to touch on some of the things you mentioned. The public service renders certain services, education, healthcare, waste management, transportation. We have the private sector literally doing these things as well: healthcare, education, transportation, waste management, you name it. I'm not sure there's anything in particular. Well, maybe there could be some things, but some of the examples you listed are things that are handled by the private sector as well. And then you talk about this rigidity, if I may use that term. That's my word now. The private sector isn't usually that way. Things get done a lot faster. And from my experience in the Niger-Delta region and by extension Nigeria, being rigid and slow doesn't necessarily mean being more efficient, because sometimes the private sector does things faster and they're more effective and they're more efficient. So how exactly does the public sector contribute to the betterment of our society?
Well, I started by saying, in spite of the bureaucratic rigidity, let me use your word, about the public service, usually when policy decisions are taken and established, they are done in the interests of the general public, not just an individual. And so, for as long as that mode of operation is in place, the public service does a better job of being fair to all concerned. Secondly, the services rendered by the public service are generally less expensive, and therefore those on the lower rungs, those who don't have a lot of money to pay for those services like healthcare and so on, can access the same healthcare from public institutions much better and still in a fast way compared to certain other services. The rigidity of the bureaucracy is often more in terms of how the systems and processes are determined. But once those are in place, things move fairly reasonably fast for those who are accessing the services. Furthermore, the public service has a greater capacity and better standards generally than the private sector. Yes, I can tell you that. I can tell you that for free. Better standards. Even the education sector. When I was in primary and secondary school, the public schools were the schools of preference.
Is it the same now?
But even now, contrary to the thinking that public schools aren't good enough, perhaps because of some of the decaying infrastructure we see, a lot of the private schools, what they are doing is what in Nigerian parlance we call effigy. It's the effigy, not the substance or content. Because I've had experiences where for some years I was a pronouncer for a club that had this annual spelling bee competition. And I was pleasantly surprised myself that the winners appeared to always come from public schools.
I think I need to point something out as we continue this conversation. This is not a public service bashing discussion
No,
that we're
I
having.
understand.
It
I
is not at all.
understand. But
It is.
I'm still inclined to defend
No, which is fine.
my constituency
I don't want you to feel.
by giving you
I don't
examples.
want to put you in defensive mode. That's why I brought this up. I'm not trying to bash the public service here. This conversation, for all intents and purposes, is primarily so we can have a better understanding and grasp of the public service, the role it plays in our lives, and how critical and crucial it is. More or less.
Even as a public servant, I also had my presumptions that were pleasantly, proved wrong. That's why I'm sharing the testimony,
Okay.
not just being defensive anyway.
Now, you talked about one of the ways in which the public service improves society.
Yeah,
Standardized.
I mentioned capacity.
Oh, you did. So,
and,
no.
an ability to reach a wider segment of the society. And most people would tell you, for instance, that a government general hospital or a government university teaching hospital would be a preferred health service or healthcare provider than a private hospital where the owner of the license is a generalist. But in the public hospital, where there is greater specialization and then greater capacity, if you go there, the generalist sees you, has something that he believes needs to be looked at by a specialist. He sends you to the specialist looks at it, and it's very often the specialist who might decide the course of treatment that might include surgery or some other more serious matter.
Now, be that as it may, you also mentioned the issue of cost earlier on as one of the ways in which the public sector, improves or, contributes to the betterment of society, because charges or fees are usually, in many cases, I do concede, significantly lower, if not even entirely free of charge. But sometimes that's strictly on paper, because in actuality, the experience of those who try to get service from the public sector experience something quite different, where you have, even in cases where you have fees and charges explicitly displayed or even announced, and it's in the public domain how much is being charged for this service, and then you get there, and then you find something totally different playing out. It happens very often here in Rivers State, in other parts of the Niger-Delta, and by extension even Nigeria as well. How important is accountability and transparency in the operations of the public service? And if it is important, are we getting it right in that regard?
Transparency and accountability. You have mentioned one aspect, which is the publication of the cost of services. So as an individual, you go to obtain a service in the public sector, and then you see a publication, whether on the website or simply pasted on a notice board, the cost of specific services. For example, you go to let's say you go to the court, you want an affidavit or you want a document to be notarized in some way or the other, and then they tell you the cost of the service. Now, unfortunately, some of the individuals who work there may create further conditions that would compel you to expend much more than the published fee. But that is, again, a problem of the badness of the individuals who create those additional conditions, and not necessarily that of the public service. Because if you go to an office where the supervisor and the people working there act through to their oath of office and make sure you don't have any additional charges apart from what the government takes for that particular service, you'll just, have the service and go away happy and celebrating without any delays, because they are following the right path. So it's more a matter of the corrupt practices of individuals. But then again, at the higher levels, we also need a little bit more of transparency and accountability, which is why it is good for government offices and department or governments in general to have websites that you and I can access, see the terms and conditions for obtaining certain services, and then get reports, accounting for the revenues and how, well, if not necessarily how they are expended, because these days we're talking about single accounts or something, So even if you're a revenue generating agency, department, or ministry of government, you're expected to just pay it into the consolidated revenue fund, which will then be disbursed in the annual budget sometime later. So, yes, one way that accountability and transparency can be improved is through the use of certain reporting platforms. The website is ideal, and then circulars, even in hard copies, as well as soft copies within those websites, will also be useful to individuals that are seeking services from the government.
Open communication, trust. Is it important? Does the public need to have a trust? Does the public service need to build trust? And does the public need to have trust in the public service for it to work effectively?
Definitely. First of all, when the expression customer relations is mentioned, the first thing that people think about is an organization that is involved in sales and marketing. But customer relations is an integral part of the public service. And I am a testimony of someone who utilized customer relations very well, and I'm even benefiting from it, because someone who had an encounter came to my office when I was working, and someone related to the person had a traumatic experience based on certain decisions that the office had taken. And the person was sufficiently worried to know why what seemed like an injustice had been committed against the relative. I took my time, because the issue, the events were within my breast. So I took my time, explained everything, which made it clear why the decision that was taken and the action that was taken by the office. And then I also said the person who felt that traumatic experience was also free to come for further explanation. The person came, and then I also explained, exchanged phone numbers, and therefore, I was just seconds away from any other experience that the person might be perplexed about, So, and that person, the outsider that came to me, had such a positive impression about that meeting that we became friends, and the person has done things, given me certain responsibilities that have improved my life, including opportunities to speak at international events. So what am I saying? If every civil servant, because one of the qualities of a civil servant or an operative in the public sector is, of course, courtesy. So if you are engaged in courtesy, you have tact and diplomacy, and you can, within the limits of your authority, share relevant information to satisfy the members of the public in that customer relations interaction. You would be a very good asset to the public service in creating trust and belief in the members of the public who require your services.
It is Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable, brought to you by SPDC. We do have to go on a break now. We'll return in a moment. The conversation will continue. Do please stay with us.
Our yellow and black markers indicate pipeline and flow line right-of-way boundaries. Your activity could impact on the buried high-pressure hydrocarbon pipelines and flow lines, leading to possible leaks and explosion. Please keep off. Do not engage in sand mining or any form of excavation, pipeline vandalism, oil theft and bush burning within pipeline and flow line right-of-way. Do not farm, trade or locate any business on pipeline and flow line right-of-way. It is against the law to apportion land, sell or build on pipeline and flow line right-of-way. Maintain a setback distance of at least 30 meters or about 100 feet from the right-of-way boundaries always. We care for your safety and that of the environment.
This message is brought to you by the Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria Limited, SPDC, operator of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company, NNPC Limited, Total Energies and Ajib Joint Venture.
Welcome back. It is Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable, brought to you by SPDC. I'm Daya. We're discussing the value and virtue of the public service. My guest is Caribou George, a lawyer, a teacher, a man of many parts, a public servant for about 26 years, am I right? 27 years, retired in 2023 last year. Of course, if anyone's qualified to talk about this, he definitely is. Great to have you here once again.
Thank you.
Is the public service crucial? Is it important at all? And if it is, how crucial is it to our existence, to our survival, if you will, to our daily experiences? Because at the start of this conversation, I referenced once again, you did mention some of the services rendered or offered by the public service, and they're all mostly, if not entirely, mostly rendered by the private sector. And there are services that maybe hitherto were exclusive to the public service, but if not in the Niger-Delta region, if not in Nigeria, in some other parts of the world, you find that these services have been, do I say, transferred, if you will, or you have the private sector now offering some of those services as well?
Well, including the broadcast services. Remember, in Nigeria, it used to be just government radio stations and television stations, but that's been decentralized, or the public sector, private sector has also
in some more extreme, some might even consider bizarre cases, services or functions such as prisons and corrections, which in most parts of the world I perceive, including here in Nigeria, is a strictly public service phenomenon. In some parts of the world, it's been privatized. You have private operators running prisons and correctional facilities and the rest of it. So that takes us to my question again. Is the public sector indispensable? How crucial and important is it?
Yeah, the public sector is indispensable. In the sense that we have already agreed the services that are rendered using, for instance, healthcare and education, for instance, they have a greater capacity to satisfy the majority of the members of the community. Then maybe using an extreme example, let's look at law, public law, particularly criminal law. If a person commits a crime, it is presumed that that crime is against the whole community, and it is the public sector that prosecutes that crime. It is in private contractual disagreements that individuals are, free to pursue civil ways of to sue themselves, under civil law to resolve such matters. But as far as the as far as crime is concerned, the public needs to be involved so that people do not resort to self-help and take matters into their hands. For instance, if someone either deliberately or unintentionally kills a person that is dear to you, and you feel there's a need to kill him as well, you do that, and then someone also close to him and considers him a dear person decides to kill you or kill someone else that is related to you, we'll just have a cycle of chaos. So the public, that's how important the public sector is in ensuring that there is a uniform way of granting redress in situations of that nature. Now, you have mentioned that in some parts of the world, the correctional services have been privatized, placed on contract. The same way that perhaps a government department, instead of hiring pensionable cleaners and people like that, decides that it should instead engage a private cleaning company and simply, pay salaries, pay contractual fees to that private company. But remember,
which happens even here in Port Harcourt and River State.
But remember that in spite of that, there is a structure, the structure of the public service that even decides whether certain services should be contracted out. I've forgotten the expression that is used for that, but anyway, whether certain services should be contracted out or kept within the purview of those employed as civil servants. But now, talking about waste management in River State, for instance, we have the Waste Management Authority, River State Waste Management Authority, RIWAMA, and then RIWAMA itself has contractors that have been assigned to different locations within the state, or at least within Port Harcourt metropolis, responsible for waste disposal and management, as the case might be. So, but there's still a core, a foundation, a skeleton, a structure of individuals paid by the government for even supervising, monitoring, and licensing those private waste disposal contractors. Now, the implication is the civil service is an office of authority and influence capable of affecting even the fortunes, the business and economic fortunes of those operating in the private sector, let's say as refuse disposal contractors. As in the case of RIWAMA being the core, and then engaging, based on capacity and all of that, and for the purposes of economic sense, engaging refuse disposal contractors to remove our refuse and have them properly disposed of. So you and I don't have to throw our refuse all over the place, uncontrollably.
We do have to move this along because of the time, but I do have a couple more questions to ask you. The topic, once again, I'd like to reference our topic, is the value and virtue of the public service. You've been speaking in great deal to the value that the public service brings. How about virtues? What virtues are required in the public service, and why are they important?
Well, the virtues would be, first of all, the decision to even be a civil servant or public servant would suggest that you are one with a disposition to be of use to others, not necessarily counting the precise remuneration arising from it. In other words, you have to have certain qualities of selflessness, and you have to believe that you are so important and what you do is so important that you shouldn't even be distracted or overly attracted by what happens in the private sector. You have a duty, a responsibility to influence policies for the benefit of all. You need to be a team player, because the bureaucracy itself, the way it is structured, is such that you are like a cog in the wheel of that progress, and therefore you need, or you're part of a chain, and you need to be strong, because a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So you don't have to be a weak link in that chain. Now, I'd already mentioned some of the qualities of a public servant: courtesy. You know, I recall something I learned, you'll be surprised, from the security personnel at the government house gate. Once they get a phone call, the first response is, "Hello, sir." Notwithstanding the status or caliber of the person on the other side of the line, you know, "Hello, sir." That's courtesy. Then you need to have tact and diplomacy. You need to be capable, still talking about teamwork, you need to be able to delegate work. And you also need to be a problem solver, because every day you'll be confronted by different scenarios. Now, if you can't solve that problem, then you need to learn how to appeal to higher authority. There's no shame in accepting that you don't know that in particular. So that also means that if you are capable of appealing to a higher authority, or maybe do some, starting with some comparison of notes with your peers, and if that doesn't help you, you now appeal to a higher authority. It means you're not ashamed, you're teachable, you're open and receptive.
Now, considering some of the challenges, and you did identify, we have identified some of the challenges to the public service, either those who require service or even public servants themselves. Why choose a career in the public service?
Because somebody has to do it. You know, usually when people graduate from school after, acquiring certain skills and abilities, the thinking is, some people think, I'm not going to work for anybody, I'll be a private businessman, and they prepare themselves, their way is cut out. Now, others say, I'm going to the private sector, sometimes motivated by a higher and better remuneration in the private sector, and then they go to the private sector. But somebody, a person of influence, capable of affecting policies and how our society can be better, needs to be in the public sector to perform that duty. And that's the reason sometimes, even when a private sector organization wants to do business in a community and they are looking for community influencers, they look for very senior civil servants who have also earned the regard and respect of their communities. There are civil servants who are celebrated in their communities because they were the ones who used their network within the civil service to cause government to bring a public school, for instance, into the community. So why a career? Beyond issues of remuneration, you are an influencer, an important influencer in your own capacity. And that's regard and respect, you'll carry it even into your community. So it's not just about the money, it's because you realize that there is an important service to be rendered. And who else but you?
Now, earlier, you spoke extensively somewhat on the challenges with accessing services, some of the issues, but we didn't really delve into, just realize now, we didn't talk maybe enough or even at all about the challenges the public servants themselves face. So, what challenges do public servants face, and how do they overcome them?
Yes. Now, first of all, the public service was a standard of measure in capacity development of staff, of personnel. Unfortunately, it's not like that again. Communication systems and processes are poor. A lot of people who are in the service operate under the burden of ignorance because systematic training is no longer part of the service as we used to know it. So that is a problem, and therefore some of the people who don't render the services the way they ought to, who do not understand the cues of courtesy in relating with members of the public, are actually the victims and outcomes of this lack of continuous training for civil servants. And then we also have the issues of poor working tools. These days, ICT equipment, computers and laptops and things like that are commonplace, but not in the public service, unfortunately, in most cases. And then the issue of poor remuneration that is not consistent with current realities, given the inflationary trends and so on and so forth. And then difficulty as accessing retirement benefits. Now, that's in fact one of the leading causes of stealing by public servants, because since they are not sure that their retirement benefits can be accessed or may be adequate, they resort to stealing in order to prepare for their own retirement. And then maybe all these are like perhaps caused by external forces, but we also have the internal matters, infighting and rivalry. Which office, which agency is going to be responsible for this, even when the law may have spelled out who has responsibility. You find some others still trying to make an inroad because of perceived benefits that they are likely to get if they get involved in that particular area of rendering service to the public. So these are some of the issues, the problems that we have in the public service, and because of this lack of training,
Yes.
we have people who are terribly bereft of the skill of communication. And when I say the skill of communication, the skill to read, understand, and digest laws relating to the service, particularly the area where you're serving or functioning, circulars relating to that particular work, the public service rules, which are revised and published very often by the office of the head of the civil service of the federation, and because of that, they don't even write well either.
We really have to move this along. So, in the face of these challenges, how do you keep yourself motivated?
Yes, the first thing for me, for a civil servant, and which was what I also practiced, was to try to do my best and take pleasure as if I was doing an altruistic work. Just pleasure, that feeling of satisfaction, fulfillment, that I have done my own bit in accordance with my conscience and whatever ethical values I subscribe to, including my religious beliefs. That's one. The second thing is, while you are still in service, prepare for retirement, not by stealing from government, but by expanding your own scope and capacity. Well, you introduced me. I'm a teacher, I'm a lawyer, I'm a communications expert, and the consequence is, outside of after retiring, and God keeping me in sound health, I don't have lack of what to do. Sometimes I may even feel underemployed when I'm not sufficiently engaged in these areas that I know I have skills and I am capable of. So have that positive outlook. And any civil servant who thinks that extorting money from the public to render service is the key to building up a financial war chest will be making a very big mistake, because there have been people who extorted a lot of money from the public in the course of their service, and then after retirement they are suddenly afflicted by one illness or the other, and we become shut-ins and can't even enjoy that money.
What advice, finally and very briefly please, what advice would you give to someone considering a career in the public service?
I would say that it's a noble thing to choose to be a civil servant. When you get there, do your job faithfully, not necessarily in expectation of additional money, bribes, or whatever, and then use the opportunity to also improve yourself in readiness for retirement. If you're a person of influence, people will come for you to continue to render services. And even if, life is not all about money, but those things will provide enough money for you to take care of your basic needs, including handling health issues that sometimes, come with aging. So as a civil servant, know that you are working practically for God. What you're doing, that's why, in those days they said that the teacher's reward was in heaven, because what you're doing is not something that the society is able to pay you adequate remuneration for. So that's one. And secondly, as I said, don't think that narrow environment of the civil service is the beginning and the end. Don't try to extort money from people. Be forward-looking and know that some of the people you encounter in the course of your service will be your network to even higher services to society later.
Thank you very much. And that's it for this edition of Canvas, the Niger-Delta Roundtable, brought to you by SPDC. Speaking with Karibi George, a lawyer, a teacher, as I mentioned before, a man of many parts, and recently retired from the public service here in Rivers State after 27 years of service. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
We have discussed the value and virtue of public service in commemoration of the United Nations World Public Service Day. Karibi George, many thanks for your time, and wish you all the very best and with retirement and the next chapter of your life.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you very much once again. I'm Adid Dayo Elushakin. Bye for now.